So good afternoon. My name is Carla Macal, and I'm a PhD student in geography. And thank you to class and Tinker Foundation for this opportunity. So the title of my presentation is Fue el Estado, Justice for the Guatemalan 56 Girls and Embodying Emotional Geographies. So I want to start by providing a background of who are the 56 Guatemalan girls. On March 8, 2017, 56 girls were victims of a fire at a state-operated shelter Hogar Seguro Virgen de la Asunción in San Jose Pinula, Guatemala. It's a small town 2 hours away from the capital, Guatemala. A day before the fire, a group of girls and boys from the shelter ran away due to cases of rape, rotten food, and physical abuses from the staff. The shelter had been red flagged and state had plans to shut it down. But this, of course, never happened, leading to this tragedy to occur. 41 of the girls died and 15 remained injured and emotionally traumatized. To understand and situate the complexities of the present day regarding the 56 Guatemalan girls case, I think it's crucial to be aware that Guatemala is a colonized territory, invaded by Europe and Western imperialist powers. As Lynn Stephen reminds us, a Spanish colonial system of castas, cased of hierarchy of rights and privileges based on constructed racial categories, which relegated indigenous people to the bottom of a racial ethnic hierarchy and resulted in more than 500 years of indigenous peoples serving as a labor source for Guatemala's colonial and modern economy, persists today on the ground. In addition, I want to point out that Guatemala has also been the military backyard of the United States through political interventions that resulted in a 36-year war armed conflict from 1960 to 1996. As Alicia Estrada reports, the genocide killed 200,000 people, 83% who identified as Mayans, 45,000 forcefully disappeared, and 1.5 million displaced. Even though Guatemala signed peace accords in 1996, until today, the people of Guatemala continue to mourn and demand justice. And my family can actually relate to this. In 2018, I was part of a community-based Solidarity House of the South in South Central Los Angeles. And we knew about the girls, we have heard the case, and we then connected to a global campaign, hashtag Nos Duelen 56. And this campaign was organized by Ocho Tijash, who I'm gonna talk about shortly. And they selected different artists from around the world to paint the photo of each of the girls. And you see the photos here on this wall. And on the photo, we as a collective, we decided to put the photos up on the space, and it was beautiful to share the stories of the girls with youth and community members who walked in the space. And this was in honor of the 56 girls. My overall research interests lie on gendered migration, and I've been asking myself the question if feminicide is pushing women to migrate north. There are scholars such as Handu, Sotelo, Abrigo, Sylvie, and Stephen, just to name a few, who have contributed to this topic of gender migration. And they say that they are contributing to a women-centered theory of settlement and also viewing gender relations as both constructive and selectively reproduced through the migration experience and resettlement, and also contributing to a critical analysis of historical and contemporary structures and processes of violence from not only physical, but also sexual assault against women. My research question for this particular project is, how are feminist organizations in Guatemala responding to state-level gender-based violence? And my aims going into the field were to build relationships with the community organizations, provide a space for collaborators to feel comfortable sharing their testimonials, their narrative, and also engage in their truth-telling and participants' truth-telling versus state's hegemonic narrative. This narrative of the state has directly blame the girls and also their families for the fire at Hogar Seguro. And in the article by Lags and Crosby, 2010 Tribunal of Conscience for Women Survivors of Sexual Violence during the Armed Conflict in Guatemala, they define truth-telling as a necessarily complex, gendered, cultural, and political construction, and it's also inherently a relational process. As well, it reminded me of Frantz Fanon's first chapter in The Wretch of the Earth, when he says, the colonized subject is always presumed guilty, but the colonized does not accept the guilt. Dominated but not domesticated and made to feel inferior, the colonized is not convinced of inferiority. And this opportunity allowed me to start doing preliminary research and conduct ethnographic field work by doing participant observation, extensive interviews, conversations, and note-taking. In addition, I was informed by methods of decolonization to deconstruct power relations from Western research tools and to steer away from that and engage with methods that prioritize the lived experiences of participants, and to also engage and practice a liberatory pedagogy by connecting my research with my own activism here at home. And on March 20th, I connected with UO Mujeres, who are an undergraduate organization on campus, and we were able to organize a vigil in honor of the 41 girls. And this allowed us to connect, and also the undergrad students were very thankful, to know more about the story that they never heard about, and it also allowed us to build a transnational praxis. And I want to read Linda Smith's quote from her book on Decolonizing Methods. She says, decolonization is a process which engages with imperialism and colonialism at multiple levels. For researchers, one of those levels is concerned with having a more critical understanding of the underlying assumptions, motivations, and values which inform research practices. So being in the field, I identified two feminist organizations working to end gender-based violence. And one of them is Ocho Tijash, and they work closely with the families of the 56 girls. And Mujer is an organization supporting sex workers in Guatemala. And I'm showing the map of Zona Uno, and zonas are equivalent to districts here in the United States, and which is more like the downtown epicenter of Guatemala City, Zona Uno, and this is also where the organizations are located and where we would meet to conduct the interviews. So first, I want to share about Ocho Tijash. And Ocho Tijash is an all-volunteer group composed of 4 women and the families of the girls. They came together once they found out about the fire and wanted to support since they felt the state or state institutions didn't respond immediately. They identify as an autonomous group who doesn't rely on state funding and consider themselves a mutual support solidarity group. I did extensive interviews with 3 of the members of Ocho Tijash, and I was also honored to interview and talk to Vianney, the woman on the right-hand side wearing a black t-shirt, and she's one of the girl's mothers. She's Ashley Hernandez's mother who passed away the day of the fire, and I want to quote her quote right here, where she says, Ashley Hernandez, was there for 3 months. I couldn't see her because the judge didn't let me. The judge was against me because my daughter ran away from home. I explained that she was troubled. They asked her if we were violent towards her. I told the judge the only one who disciplines her is her mom. So this quote was relevant to notice the multi-layered struggle of Vianney has not only the fact that her daughter died, but also dealing with the legal system and not feeling any type of support from these institutions. However, she did share that she felt more supported by Ocho Tijash, who without even knowing her, they stood by her side throughout these years. And as a human geography student, I'm always thinking about space, distance, place, and relationships. And during one of the interviews with Maria, who's part of Ocho Tijash, I thought it was relevant, the story she shared with me about how the families had to find out about their daughter's whereabouts. So she showed me, she drew on her notebook an image, and that's the image I have in the photo. And on the left-hand side, I was able to kind of clear it up a little bit, and so the red square represents the shelter Hogar Seguro Virgen de la Asunción. The black circle is the volunteers, Ocho Tijash, and and the stars are the family members, and the arrows represent the social interaction they were having in order for them for the families to find out where their daughters were. So she shared that hours after the fire, some of them went again to the shelter, and they became intermediaries, right, between the families and Hogar Seguro staff. What was happening is that families were giving them on a piece of paper, they were writing the name of their daughters, and they would give them to Ocho Tijash, and Maria would go to the staff and ask, like, where's this name, right? Where's Ashley, for example? And then the shelter, the staff in Spanish would say, this girl evadió proceso, or no evadió proceso, meaning she followed the rules or she didn't follow the rules. If she didn't, that meant the daughter was at the hospital, at the morgue, and dead. So using Doreen Massey's literature about space and social relations, I found this really interesting to see how space had to be constructed to gain some answers, and that social relations were also formed or acquired during this process in time of survival and agony. Also, power relations continue to be constructed through space. In this photo, as we see here, we see the interaction, youth, right, who are sitting next to the shelter, and then the police who are standing up. And so there's this power dynamic, and this photo also symbolizes the phrase that Ocho Tijash and families would say. They would actually just blame the state. They would say it was the state, fue el Estado. And of course, this phrase has also been used in Mexico, right, with the disappeared students in Ayotzinapa, Mexico. And I want to read the quote from Mayra, where she says, the police, the authorities, where they are part of the Guatemalan state, they had to preserve the life of the girls, and they did not. It's their fault the girls died. Until today, the legal process has been slow, a very bad investigation. It's been 2 years the girls passed away. The first legal process for the first group could have begun, but it has not. It's 3 groups. So now I want to transition to share a little bit about Mujer, the second organization that I was able to work with. And unlike Ocho Tijash, Mujer does receive funding from different international organizations. They are a nonprofit, and they receive funding from the Global Fund for Women and even Loyola Marymount University. Mujer has helped some of the families of the 56 girls, but it's not as invested as Ocho Tijash. And they identify as a community-based organization. They have more of an organized staff, from the board of directors, right, the executive director, the fiscal manager, right, the members, and their main task is to support Guatemalan sex workers. And they do this by providing life skills to their members, from computer to public speaking skills. And I thought Flores, who's the executive director of the organization, what she mentioned is really relevant. And she says, originally Mujer's mission is to work with sex workers, but also through this work, we have identified that there are many Central American women migrants and migrants from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, who go to Guatemala to work. And Mujer has provided them with resources such as with contraceptives, health education, mental health support. So we see also this regional support that Mujer is facilitating. I also noticed that relationships were based on reciprocity, and sometimes it was interesting. It was hard to distinguish between who's the staff and who are the members. So one day I walked in, and they were all cooking tamales, like food. They were all gonna eat together, and they were gonna sit down and eat together, and it felt very welcoming environment. That environment kind of fostered me to kind of ask and share a natural deodorant workshop with all of them, and as a kind of like as a thank you, right, because they were providing this research, this interviews. And from my field notes, I wrote some of the women were taking a beauty training workshop when I arrived. They are also really excited to take the natural deodorant workshop I'm providing at 2 p.m. There's the field collective empowerment, and the organization since examined alcohol. During the workshop, Flor was super helpful, as well as a volunteer. It was a beautiful experience for me because I was sharing a natural deodorant workshop in my motherland. It felt surreal, but with the beautiful feel of volunteerism and abundance. So findings. So as I transcribed my interviews and reflected on my notes, I really place the work of both organizations within the perspective of feminist economies, feminismo, economía feminista, which I've heard a lot from Latin American feminist scholars. And these are, looking after my question, right? So how are they responding since they live with gender-based violence? And they're doing this by providing small-scale contributions, right, to ending this violence. And also by intentionally building relationships with the people they prioritize to support. And some examples I have here for the use of care, right? Like they care for each other, how reciprocity is based on their social interactions. For example, Ocho Tijas accompanies families to court cases. They use traditional healing practices. During the interviews, I would see them use like essential oils on each other because just to feel like more calm, right? Altars like ceremony. Mujer provides family environment, and the members of the organization are also allowed to bring their children. So I felt a lot that they were very using collective and communal cultural values. In addition, I heard both organizations and members use the term cariño. So in English, it's translated to sweetie. So if you feel like you have like trust and like a friend, or even within family members, you usually say sweetie, or in Spanish we say cariño, right? So so there was that throughout the interactions, and some examples from the interviews when I would ask them like, well, what makes you do this type of work? Like so for example, Mayra would share like, within deep pain, love is born. Our work is based on solidarity and mutual support. Maria said that. And Paola, who's a sex worker, and now she's part of the board of directors of Mujer. She says equality among all of us, sharing knowledge. Gladys, she's a psychologist. She said following the logic of autonomy so women can become autonomous. And I really felt that this picture here resonated with this term of cariño. El Estado no nos cuida, no nos cuidamos nosotras. The state doesn't take care of us, we take care of each other. And this was from a protest on March 8th, 2020, for International Women's Day. Again, remembering, right, the girls, because that's the day they passed away. And so with embodying emotional geographies, I see it that it connects to these two experiences, right? Being part of the work from these two organizations. And as the literature of embodied emotional geographies tells us that emotions are embodied experiences of social relations and as interpersonal. And affect is not a personal capacity, but is instead a capacity residing in many bodies and objects simultaneously. And walking down the streets of Guatemala, it feels like there's this like permanent mourning, right? And even expressing in people's bodies. This feeling is weaved on people's geographies, right? From in Guatemala, from Huehuetenango to the capital of Guatemala. However, I also see that this embodiment of emotional geographies is also something to learn, right, as researchers, as we go out in the field, especially coming from the global north. And I think, especially for me, very personal, since I live among the Central American diaspora, right? Like some of these stories also resonate with my own family stories. And as we live in a new age of oppression, our precarity and racism, we remind ourselves that it's not only okay for us as scholars to be emotional, but we should glean, embody, intersubjective insight from our emotional engagements and struggles in the field. So this preliminary research has led me to continue this work, and I will be writing a paper for Feminist Geography Journal, Gender, Place, and Culture, asking these following questions. How do contested sites build on the narrative to recuperate a collective historic memory in Guatemala? How do Abya indigenous feminist epistemologies complicate state sites through decolonization? And so with contested sites, I'm talking about the altar in Guatemala of the 41 girls. And this altar was actually removed by state authorities to celebrate Guatemala's independence on September 11th, 2019, saying that the issue of the case of the 41 girls is an event of the past. And this, of course, infuriated many organizations, including Ocho Picash, and the families and everyone really feeling it as a disrespectful act by the state. Now, I've been following the work of Lorena Caminal. She has this whole kind of epistemology of using like feminismo comunitario, and she and other and youth, right, and other indigenous women um, put back the altar of the 41 girls. And she says, embodying spiritual, political, community, feminist, territorial, and the symbolic space, right, to make our political grieving visible for the memory and dignity of the 41 girls and 15 survivors of March 8th, 2017, denouncing the state of Guatemala. It was not the fire, it was the feminicide state. And lastly, to conclude, I would like to read Irma Alicia Velasquez Matu quote, and she says, "These are not just legal precedents, but cases that directly affect the lives of people, many of whom live in conditions of extreme poverty and for whom justice is long overdue. It is important to remember that the struggle doesn't end when the trial does. Survival still face a society and a state that continue to criminalize them with accusations that they are communists, guerrillas, terrorists, and freeloaders." Thank you. Just some acknowledgements. The organization's class, Tinker Foundation, my advisor, Dr. Laura Pulido, you, Critical Race Lab, and of course my family and friends. Thank you for listening.